Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Today is Thursday, June 27th, and today we are going to be reacting to the NBA draft. We saw the first round take place last night, so we're going to be going over some of the best and worst moves of the first round so far. We'll look ahead a little bit as well to what is remaining in the second round, things to look forward to there as the draft picks up again later this afternoon at 4 o'clock p.m. Eastern. So it'll be taking place very shortly after we get off here. And then in the latter half of the show, we are going to be providing updates on the situation regarding OG Anunoby and the New York Knicks. They agreed to a contract extension, so we will be breaking that down. And then finally, Tua Tagovailoa and the Miami Dolphins have not been necessarily seeing eye to eye just yet throughout the contract negotiation process. So we are going to be diving into the latest updates surrounding that and what is next for the Dolphins if Tua weren't to pan out for them. But before we get into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To all of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on all the latest happenings in sports. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can use the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. You can leave a comment with a tip or donation that will pop up on the screen for everyone to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. The first round of the NBA draft was last night, and I think that ultimately it was a pretty interesting draft just in terms of, no, we didn't necessarily have the superstar talent right at the top of it, but I still thought that there was a lot of intrigue in this draft. So I'm going to be running through the best moves from the first round that we saw take place last night. And I want to start with the Minnesota Timberwolves, who of course won over a lot of people from a national standpoint throughout their Western Conference Finals run. And it seemed like this was going to be a situation where the Wolves are just sort of looking to run it back into next year. Had a lot of success, but feel like they just need a little bit more postseason experience and they should be back in the picture. But they decided to get aggressive in this year's draft, where they moved up to the number 8 spot and they selected Kentucky guard Rob Dillingham. And they ultimately trade a 2030 pick swap and a 2031 unprotected first round pick. So the price wasn't exactly all too high either. They didn't have to give off any of their current assets as well. And in return, they end up getting a very promising young guard that I definitely think they needed backup guard play. We saw how much this team sort of at times lived and died by Mike Conley, who I love as a player, but at this point in his career, as he continues to get older, that wasn't going to be possible necessarily to continue to lean on him so heavily. So they trade for Dillingham, get that backup guard to Mike Conley. And we also did see in the Western Conference Finals, there were moments during this series where they just were in desperate need of having another creator take place for them. When Anthony Edwards was shut down, there wasn't anybody else you felt necessarily confident in trying to, go out and score, create for themselves in isolation. And that's where you bring in Dillingham, who is the epitome of a little bit of an irrational confidence guy, but he hits the shots is the thing as well. So I think that he is going to be such a fun fit with Minnesota. His energy is going to be super compatible with that of Anthony Edwards. So I think that this is a great fit for the two of them. And, as long as he is able to properly develop on defense, playing in a Minnesota system where obviously defense is their calling card, as long as he can be passable there, I think he cracks the rotation for the Timberwolves. Now, it is interesting the fact that the Timberwolves did just give up another first-round pick. They, of course, gave up 5 and a swap for Rudy Gobert a couple off seasons ago. So they now only have control of their first-round pick in one of the next 7 drafts. There are also a couple pick swaps now in 2026 and 2030. So technically they will have 3 first-round picks in the next 7 years. But still, this is a Timberwolves team that I think people sort of overlook how old a number of their contributing pieces are. So I did just find that interesting, but I also agree with the deal to go out and get a talent like Dillingham, who I'm definitely a fan of. I was a little bit disappointed, though, because when this was first announced, we hadn't yet known that he was headed to Minnesota. The Spurs had the pick at the time and then traded the rights to him. I was really looking forward to Dillingham and Wembanyama playing alongside one another as well. They would have been a borderline must-watch team, I think. I mean, Wemby already is, this factor in himself, but Dillingham is just such a fun player that the highlight reels of him and Wemby would have been incredible. But Dillingham didn't exactly strike me as a Greg Popovich type of player. So maybe this is, all for the best. Now, it was a little bit disappointing for San Antonio, where you have this up-and-coming commodity in Victor Wembanyama, and everybody expects him to be one of the best players in the league, 3-4 years from now, if not sooner. And it could have been nice for them to just take a swing on one of these types of players. But that being said, this draft does have a bad reputation surrounding it, so maybe the Spurs just wanted to get in and get out as soon as possible. They took Stephon Castle with the 4th overall pick, which I also did really like for them. I think that there's going to be a chance that defense gets really scary really soon with Castle on the perimeter and Wembanyama at the rim. But I just think that Dillingham would have also been a really fun addition to that team. So I can't necessarily bury the Spurs and, claim that they are this outright loser of the draft. It just was maybe slightly disappointing because it would have been a ton of fun. But, ultimately, the Spurs, they get Castle, they get their guy, and they should be in a decent position, acquire some future draft capital as well. But the Timberwolves also stuck with their pick at 27 and took Terrence Shannon Jr., who is obviously now on the other end of some legal allegations that were, sort of hindering his pre-draft process and his expectations. He very easily could have been a lottery pick this year, but he is on the older end at, he's going to be 24 next year, so that obviously dings him as well in terms of a prospect for a lottery team. But, for the Timberwolves here with the 27th pick, I think there's a very real possibility Terrence Shannon Jr. can get some real minutes for them, be able to play in transition. He's a good defender. Now, the reliability of the three-point shot is really still what we're waiting on with Terrence Shannon Jr., but, at the same time, I just think that him, Dillingham, and Anthony Edwards is going to be such a little new fun nucleus where obviously it's Ant on a tier by himself and then these other 2 players. But I think that from an energy standpoint, and as NBA Twitter loves to put it, aura standpoint, I think that this team is going to be so much fun to watch. And they already were basically, must watch because of Ant. But I think they get that much more fun, and I'm definitely curious to see how the Timberwolves choose to add these players into the rotation. But I think that one of the bigger stories that was developing after that sort of shock at the 8th overall pick was the fall of Dalton Knecht. It comes outside of the lottery, even, then it's the pick number 15 with the Heat, and they choose to go a different direction. And it was getting dark there for a minute for Knecht, but he does get picked up by the Lakers at number 17. I thought he was a consensus top 10 player in this draft, and I am still very high on him. This is a pretty good fit for him, all things considered. A nice selection, I think, for the Lakers, going out and get a scorer of this caliber, and he's going to be able to play actual minutes for them. We saw in these past couple years, they've gone with a little bit more of developmental prospects, and now they get somebody that I think you can throw Connect on an NBA court, and he will be able to find some spots, be a contributor on the offensive end. And we saw his defense improve throughout the course of the year as well, so I don't necessarily have any concerns. Again, when you're talking about the Lakers, for me, I think their approach should just be finding compatible players alongside, outside sort of LeBron James and Anthony Davis, not buying all into this third star strategy. And he's a really nice fit in there as well. So I did like that. I thought that whole stretch of picks from 15 to 18 were really solid for some of these playoff teams, where we saw the Heat go with Kel'el Ware, sophomore center out of Indiana. The biggest concern with him was his freshman season at Oregon. There was a little bit of concern about his motor and such, and you now throw him into Heat culture, and I feel like it's just about impossible to not, have some level of intensity to you at that point. But it is a little interesting that they decided to go with the center, hours after paying Bam Adebayo this new contract extension, 3 years, $166 million. So you're drafting a backup here, but at the same time, there is a chance that these two could play with one another. They're different body types. Bam a little bit shorter. Ware is a true 7-footer, and he can stretch the floor as well. He is maybe even a little bit more dynamic than Bam. Now, you're taking Bam over him 10 times out of 10, but it could be an interesting double big wrinkle to sort of throw in there for Miami that I would definitely be curious in. Number 16 was the 76ers taking Jared McCain, freshman guard out of Duke. One of the best shooters in this draft, should very easily be able to work his way into the rotation for Philly, especially considering the fact they only have 3 players on the roster right now. Obviously, that'll change, but I definitely think McCain can be the 8th man on this Sixers team, if not better. So I like that pick a lot. Like we just talked about, connect to the Lakers. Number 18, Tristan da Silva, selected by the Orlando Magic, senior forward out of Colorado. And I think that he is just what the Magic need in terms of spacing and getting some of that shooting as well from outside of the backcourt, where they already have enough guards. You end up getting somebody standing at 6'8" who can spread out the floor. He is just an overall very competent offensive player in terms of can put the ball on the floor, can make the right passes, can hit his shots, can finish fine as well. He played a little bit bigger in college. I expect him to be more of a traditional 3 probably in the NBA, maybe 4 in this modern game. But Da Silva has a good chance to make their rotation, and at this point the Magic are not necessarily on this draft young players and develop them arc. They just saw them go to 7 against a good team in the first round of the playoffs, and they would really like to start capitalizing on the talent that has officially arrived for them, backed by Paolo Banchero. So I really liked all of those moves. Some other moves that we will quickly hit here. I want to talk about Reed Sheppard going number 3 to the Houston Rockets. I thought it was a great pickup for the Rockets. I would have preferred to see Sheppard end up somewhere where he can get a little bit more experience in terms of being a ball handler, but at the same time, he's going to make the Rockets better. I think that he is one of the safest prospects in this draft. He's going to find a role. I know the size is a little bit of a concern in terms of, is his defense where he gets a lot of deflections, is that going to translate to the NBA? I think it will, good enough, and that was a nice decision from the Rockets in my eyes. The Nuggets and the Celtics both made selections. Not just that, the Nuggets actually traded up to number 22 to go get De'Ron Holmes, the junior big man out of Dayton. 6'9" with a 7'1" wingspan, was a 20-point per game scorer last season after transferring. He hasn't necessarily established himself in terms of consistency at the highest level of competition, being able to get it done offensively, but I do think that this is a pretty nice pickup for the Nuggets, who haven't really had a true backup to Jokic since he's entered his prime. And Holmes can probably not just back Jokic up, but could probably even play alongside him as well, I would say. So I did really like this pickup. Suns, by the way, who traded down out of this pick, also got Ryan Dunn. Kind of an interesting move there. They got him at number 28. I think the best defender in this draft class, so didn't hate that for the Suns either. The Celtics, though, at number 30, was really surprised to see them draft here, but they actually stick there and take Baylor Shireman, the senior guard out of Creighton, and I thought that this was a really nice pickup for the Celtics, where Shireman is somebody who could absolutely crack a rotation for a competitive team because of the fact that he is just such a known quantity on the offensive side of the ball, knowing that he can be a good shooter, can be a fine passer and a ball handler. He even averaged 9 rebounds per game from a guard position last year. So I thought that this was a pretty nice pickup in terms of value for the reigning champions, in terms of being able to get somebody that could be a known quantity for them this season. Obviously, expectations aren't all too high there. But last couple picks here, just some few high potential freshmen that went on the later side for some good value. The Raptors took Jacoby Walter at number 19, freshman guard out of Baylor. The Pelicans took his teammate, big man Yves Missi, who I am high on. They get him at number 21. He could maybe even get some actual playing time for them, considering the fact that they are going to be probably without their starting center for next season. Jonas Valanciunas is a free agent this offseason. We saw them sort of defer away from him down the stretch of last year and in the postseason. So I think that Yves Missi definitely has an opportunity to work his way into the rotation there. And then the Jazz get former number 1 overall recruit Isaiah Collier with the 29th draft pick, and I thought that that was incredible value for them, where this was a disastrous season for USC this past year. Collier ends up getting hurt. The team was never good, and he was sort of overshadowed a little bit by the Bronny James conversations as his teammate. But the Jazz just got, a player who you can see the speed and athleticism with him. I think that there is a very good chance that he could pan out, and getting him and Cody Williams, I thought the Jazz came out great in this draft. But let me know in the comments section what your favorite picks are. We're going to be diving into the other end of this conversation of my least favorite picks, but before we do so, we are going to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, and as we continue to talk about the 2024 NBA Draft, we just covered all of my favorite moves. We do have to go to the other end and talk about my least favorite moves. Try and stay as positive as possible here, obviously, on the GSMC Sports Podcast. But there were definitely some moves that I wouldn't say there was any outright disastrous draft selections here, but definitely some ones that I don't feel great about, and it starts with the number 1 overall pick and the Atlanta Hawks, who decided to stick there and take Zachary Rissache, who is a French prospect. He's just, 19 years old, and he could definitely have some upside in this league, but the Hawks even deciding to stick with the number 1 overall pick is maybe a little bit of a question in my eyes, where they're still trying to figure out what their identity is. It doesn't seem like they have too much of an idea yet in terms of whether or not they want to stick it out with the combination of Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. Trae has 2 seasons left and a player option on his contract, which could make him a free agent by the 2026 offseason. DeJounte Murray is now entering the first year of his new contract extension with them, where he is going to be guaranteed through the 2026-27 season and have a player option in the summer of 2027. So he will be 31 headed into that year. It doesn't really seem like they're all that interested in a rebuild up to this point, and I'm not really sure what Rissache necessarily brings to the Hawks, at least in the short term. And it was interesting during the broadcast watching Jay Billis say that, he's not a creator and that he's not athletic. And at that point, being taken number 1 overall, you're kind of saying that this is a 3-and-D type player is sort of what he kind of shades to. And, the 3-point shooting has shown a lot of promise at times and is something that can very likely be a part of his game, that as long as he has that, I think that he has the physical tools that he'll be able to stay on an NBA court. He's a solid defender, and again, as long as he has that reliable shot, he can work his way into the rotation. I don't expect him to be getting these heavy minutes year 1. And again, the fact that we're sort of talking about this in terms of the number 1 overall pick definitely feels underwhelming. But when you talk about your typical number 1 overall pick, especially looking back at the recent history of Zion, Anthony Edwards, Cade Cunningham, Paolo, and Wemby, obviously the idea is you want an all-NBA upside player at number 1, but that was just never going to take place in this draft that we've been hearing about for a year, that there isn't that top-end talent. And Rissache is just going to have to be in a different conversation than those names I just rattled off in terms of former number 1 overall picks. But I think that in most other years, Rissache doesn't go top 3 because of the lack of superstar, because the fact that he doesn't necessarily scream superstar potential to me, but he can still be an early lottery pick in most years. But what we've been hearing is this draft is almost like if you cut out the top 5+ picks and started there. And that's kind of what Rissache is going to fall prisoner to a little bit, but he's going to have that number 1 overall label tied to him. So it's going to be interesting. I don't know how much on-ball experience he's really going to be able to get with the Hawks in a situation that is very ball-dominant from their backcourt. Now, that might even be better for him, who just needs to start with being a reliable shooter and seeing where it plays out from there. It's interesting. Rissache actually kind of reminds me of Deni Avdija, but they're almost opposite versions of each other, where it's like Avdija is the defensive variant and Risa Shea is the offensive variant. Both of them are about 6'9", have wingspans of about 6'9". They are international players, of course, not exceptionally athletic, but still athletes, and what they're making of is just sort of opposite, where Avdija was known to be a good defender at the next level, and Risa Shea, it feels like the offense should be a guarantee, but there's still a lot of unknowns with both of these. I don't know if there was anybody who's going to be able to drastically help the Hawks at the number 1 overall selection, and I do kind of wish they traded out of it, but hopefully I'm wrong about him. I'm curious to see how excited the average Hawks fan is for this, because it definitely felt like it was a little bit flat when he was the name announced with the number 1 overall pick. But again, not trying to rain on someone's parade after they accomplish something like this. But I did just mention Deni Avdija, and he was definitely at the top of my mind when I was taking these notes, because of the fact that he was just traded yesterday, as the Washington Wizards just continue to confuse me. Where yesterday, a couple hours before the draft, they make a deal. They're trading Deni Avdija for Malcolm Brogdon, the 14th overall pick in this year's draft, which they ended up using on Bub Carrington, a 2029 first-round pick, and 2 second-round picks. I don't really understand what the point of it is for the Wizards. I'm high on Avdija after this past season. Like I mentioned, always been a very talented defender, can play into a team system, and he showed his best efficiency yet this past year on the offensive side of the ball as well, averaging 15 points per game on 51% from the field and 37% from 3. I would like to think that based off of his play style, he isn't a good stats, bad team guy that just benefits from somebody has to take the shots. And I would say that the overall efficiency with him would probably support that. I do think he is more than that. But it was just a weird move to me, because Bub Carrington, he's a fun player, and Wizards fans are absolutely going to talk themselves into, him being a fun player to have and, a potential bucket for them. But I think that he's far more likely to fall into the category of being a good stats bad team guy than Avdija is. And, as a freshman who just spent his season at Pittsburgh, I don't want to put any sort of cap on his ceiling by any means, and maybe he does work out really well for them. I think that there is upside. I don't know. I understand at this point Avdija is 23 years old. He's getting a little bit older, but still at the same time, it was just the one thing I felt like they really were building around. Now, they have some other players, like Corey Kispert is a solid young guy as well. Whatever you want to sort of chalk Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma up to, you can. But just, again, a very interesting situation going on in Washington, where they bring in a guard going into his age 32 season that has an extensive injury history and really hasn't shown a consistency in play since the beginning of the 2023 playoffs. And last year he was definitely a victim of the Trailblazers kind of trying to tank a little bit. They already had guards sort of under their belt to try and develop anyways, so it was not the right position for him. I thought the Trailblazers made out really well, though, in this trade, and we'll see for the Wizards, who did also take Alex Sarr at number 2, so I don't think the Wizards fans should feel horrible this morning necessarily. It's just a lot of unknowns, and I thought that Avdija was rounding into something you could legitimately see being a building block of sorts. Not necessarily a number 1 or a number 2, but a really quality role player. And I suppose the Wizards are just going to try and be all in on tanking, and if they're going to flip Malcolm Brogdon, I don't know. We'll see. The Wizards are always a little bit of a mystery to me in terms of the way that they choose to operate at times. But I have a couple other moves here that I didn't hate, but were definitely surprising to some degree and could be seen as a little bit of head scratchers. The Pistons took Ron Holland 5th overall. I don't know if I necessarily see the fit that is there in Detroit. Now, if they do, I mean, they don't even have a head coach yet. So, fit into what exactly is still a little bit of an unknown. But, I mean, you do look at Holland, and if you pair him up with Cade Cunningham, Jaden Ivey, Asar Thompson, I mean, that's a group that can absolutely run in transition. And I'm curious whether or not they sort of lean almost Pacers style. Now, they cannot shoot to the same level that the Pacers can, and that's a big issue. But they could be a really fun transition team. I think Jalen Duren can also, from your 5 position, run the court as well. So who knows what their strategy is going to be from a coaching perspective just yet. The big thing is spacing, though. I just mentioned not very much three-point shooting around them. I think it would be, if I'm the Pistons, honestly, a name that probably doesn't mean all too much to the majority of, more casual NBA fans, but Simone Fontecchio, who played for the Jazz the past couple years, was traded at the deadline this past year. I think he's a legitimately good player and can space out the floor for you, so I'd be trying to bring him back if I can. But another interesting fact here is the fact that they brought in Fred Vincent as an assistant coach even before having the actual head coach, but the Pistons went out and got Vincent, who is regarded as one of the better shooting coaches in the NBA, so that will probably be a developmental point of focus for the Pistons next season. So we'll see if that plays out for them. But again, Holland, I don't know if I love it necessarily at number 5 to the Pistons. The Trailblazers brought in another big man in Donovan Clingan with the 7th overall pick. Last offseason, we just saw them trade for DeAndre Ayton and Robert Williams, and it feels like there has to be some other move coming here. I would think that it is probably going to try and be DeAndre Ayton, see if they can talk any teams into the level of production that he had down the stretch of last year. And I still don't think that Ayton is a bad player. The contract he's at, though, is definitely where it might be harder to find suitors. Maybe they decide to go with Rob Williams, who, I mean, the issue is his value probably isn't too high coming off of the injury that he had last year to his knee. So we'll see there. I thought that was a very interesting selection, especially because I had made the comparison, in the past week or so of Clingan to Ayton if he were to go number 1 and were to end up like DeAndre Ayton, because I do see a little bit of shades of Ayton in Clingan's game, but almost more refined in some areas, and now they're going to be teammates, at least for the time being, so we'll see there. But last couple moves here. Because the Trailblazers took Clingan at number 7, number 9, the Grizzlies were sitting on the clock in desperate need of a center. At least that's what the reports are. They were trying to move up to get Clingan. Instead, they have to settle for Zach Edey at number 9, who, of course, Edey, one of the most polarizing prospects, at least lottery prospects in recent NBA history, and he ends up going number 9, where I think he's going to get real playing time here in Memphis. I talked about this yesterday. I see no reason why a 7'3" player that does have some real offensive talents being able to carve out a role for himself in the NBA level. And the Grizzlies don't have real center play. So Edey, I think, can get some run here, and I don't hate the move. It was funny, though, hearing the crowd's reaction, where I think everybody in the world was probably making a similar noise of, it wasn't a cheer, it wasn't a boo, but it was just reacting like, whoa, they actually did it. So that was pretty funny to see there. But last couple moves here I have are the Knicks and the Bucks, who late in the first round decided to make some moves. The Bucks decided to take AJ Johnson at number 23. Johnson is a project player who played in Australia this past year in the NBL and got very little playing time. Wasn't exactly sharp when he was out on the court, but that, averaged just 2.9 points per game, but that's who the Bucks decided to go with here. Now, first off, very cool of him to not be invited to the green room, but to buy a bunch of tickets so that he was able to cross the stage himself and hear his name selected. That was pretty awesome. So that alone probably makes me root for him if you're going to be betting on yourself like that. But doesn't really seem like somebody who plays into the timeline of what the Bucks are trying to do contending right now, and that was definitely interesting to me. But then the last one here, the Knicks took Pacome Dadier at number 25. Almost messed up the pronunciation there, but Pacome Dadier at number 25, and there's a lot of rumors that he is going to be a draft and stash. I don't think that this was a bad move by any means for them. I think that the reality is they just, opened up a number of different avenues in terms of they just paid a number of different guys, and they still have contracts on the horizon that they're going to have to pay with Jalen Brunson and Mikal Bridges, and they just signed OG Anunoby prior to the draft yesterday. I just don't think there was any way they were going to be able to take on two more guaranteed contracts for players who probably won't get all that much runway, because the Knicks already have a lot of their rotation filled out. And that is what we're going to dive into next, is the New York Knicks, who just signed Anunoby to that deal, and we're going to sort of get more so into the details surrounding that. So we're going to be taking a quick break. Don't go anywhere, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. So we do have a little bit of breaking news here in the NBA that the Houston Rockets have just acquired forward AJ Griffin from the Atlanta Hawks. So the Hawks are making some moves. I just talked about how I was sort of wanting them to make a trade with the number 1 overall pick. So they don't get that done, but they do still make a move here. It is just in exchange for the 44th overall pick tonight. So Griffin, who was the 16th pick in the 2022 draft and showed some flashes, gets sold at a pretty low price point here, and the Hawks move into the 44th overall pick, which is obviously not the value that they were hoping for headed into this upcoming season after taking him, just outside the lottery a couple years ago. But things just didn't work out for Griffin in Atlanta last year. Now, Griffin has a high upside, I would say, from an offensive perspective. He has a three-point shot that shows promise. Last year in the G League, when he got a lot of minutes there, 40% from three. So, again, the Rockets kind of feel like are doing a really good job here, where I hope so badly that they don't screw this up by trying to make a deal trading for Kevin Durant, because that would just absolutely throw off the nucleus that they already have. And not just the nucleus of it, but they seem like they are on this rising path. I mean, they hadn't won 25 games in a season since James Harden was traded a number of years ago, And now finally you have one good season at 41-41, season 1 with Ime Udoka as the head coach. Don't throw it all away just to try and go chase after the star power of Kevin Durant. Now, I talked about this at length on my show yesterday, so I don't want to necessarily dive into this all once again, but it would be a lot more interesting for me if they were going to go after Devin Booker and try and make some sort of a deal there where, I mean, contracts-wise, you probably have to give up Fred VanVleet and some draft capital, and probably even like a Jalen Green as well, especially if you're going to be bringing in Devin Booker. But, overall here, I don't want to get too off topic, but the Rockets going out to make this kind of a move, I'm a big fan of, and we'll see whether or not AJ Griffin is able to get any sort of playing time. But before we get into the conversation around the Knicks, I want to look ahead to today. It is 2:44 right now as we're recording this, so we are just about an hour and 15 minutes away from round 2 of the NBA draft. So I want to look at some of the key players to keep an eye on. Of course, Bronny James is one of the biggest talking points in terms of this second round. Now, I would bet most of my money that he does end up getting selected. The fact that the Lakers have whatever it is, the 57th pick, I think no way he goes undrafted just off of the name itself. It is what it is, So I don't think it's being critical of him. I think that he's just, I don't view him as an NBA player just yet. And, we'll see. But I don't think that he has the power this offseason to lure a team to take him just for the sake of drafting LeBron James and bringing him over. It's probably a couple years away, I would say, until LeBron is fully focused on playing with Bronny. He said he wanted it to be, his last year or so. I think he has a couple seasons left. So Bronny's going to be a talking point, but ultimately there are a lot more impact guys out there, and starting with Johnny Furphy, who is a guard, you could say wing from Kansas. Now, I was never a huge fan of Furphy, but there was a span in January, February maybe even a little bit earlier than that, but when Furphy took over in the starting lineup for the Jayhawks this past year, he was lights out as a shooter. And he was, maybe even at that time, when I was keeping up with mock drafts, he was thrown in there somewhere in the lottery conversation, and now he's fallen out of the first round entirely. And again, I'm not the biggest fan of him necessarily, but a lot of NBA scouts were high on him. Again, the scoring ability is something that has shown a lot of potential, and you're getting him at, 19 years old, whatever it is, coming off of his freshman season. Furphy could be somebody who could end up being a little bit of a steal in some scenarios. Kyle Filipowski is probably the overall biggest name that is still available for this second round. The big man from Duke that, of course, got into, I wouldn't say it was a controversy necessarily, but the whole court storming situation against Wake Forest, he was the one who got injured coming out of it. Now, ultimately, he played every game from there, so it was a little bit overblown in the first place, but interesting that Filipowski, I think, would have been a first-rounder last year if he entered the draft. Instead, he comes back for a sophomore season at Duke and now is going to be a second-round pick. But Filipowski, again, 6'11", he can absolutely provide something for a team just that is in need of a backup big. I feel like there are a number of teams, specifically in the Western Conference, that could very much benefit. I mean, this would be a situation I think I might love if the Thunder were to package some picks to try and move up early in the second round and take a swing at Filipowski, but definitely something to take into consideration there. Tyler Kolek. There are a number of guys that yesterday I put a list together and never actually even unloaded it, but some, potential culture builder guys, just in terms of, some guards that are going to be extremely hard workers and practice every day. And, if they get a chance, have shown the ability to improve the play of others. You got Tyler Kolek, KJ Simpson, Jamal Shed, and Tristan Newton. Now, there are different concerns with a number of these players, starting with the age factor of it. None of them, all of them have some years behind them. They're not the youngest of prospects that feel like they have this extremely high upside, but all of them are just kind of grinders. I think they do an excellent job of setting teammates up in the right positions. Now, size is definitely a concern for a number of these guys, specifically Kolek, Simpson, and Shed, I would say. Newton is a little bit more, the athleticism is a little bit questionable there as well. But, all of these players I do think would be really interesting fits with a number of these young teams. Talked about the Spurs, their entire strategy in this draft should be to put players around Wembanyama that can help him succeed. Stephon Castle was a great pick for them in the first round, and I fully support that decision. But part of the issue with Castle, and he's a good passer and everything, we don't know if he necessarily is going to translate to be a traditional point guard like he hopes. I think trying to go out and get Kolek, who might be the best passer in this draft, the Spurs pick at number 35, that might be a great situation for them to go out and get somebody who can set the table a little bit for Wembanyama. I think that Kolek would be, out of the names that I just put out there, probably the highest floor, maybe even, or just the player I would most likely have to succeed. But again, all those names are ones that I would be interested in maybe if I'm a younger team that doesn't have all that much set up yet, and you're just trying to establish, a style of winning basketball. I think that any one of them could be a pretty nice late pickup. But some other names at the top of this second round, we just mentioned Johnny Furphy of Kansas University, his teammate Kevin McCullough Jr., who had a little bit of a controversial end to his college career, where it seemed like Hunter Dickinson and Bill Self weren't fully bought in on the idea that he was dealing with injuries and that he wasn't going to be good to go. Sat out the Big 12 tournament, and it seemed like at that point they were convinced that he was going to be able to return. Now, again, all of that might have been aggregated, and it could have been just water under the bridge. But either way, McCullough was a very good player at the college level. Small forward for Kansas. He sits at 6'6", so I do have a little bit of concern in terms of whether or not his style of play is going to translate to the next level in terms of being a scorer, not necessarily having the size advantage to lean on quite as much, but something to be said there. And then last couple names here, Cam Spencer and Harrison Ingram and Jalen Wells, I'll throw in that category as well, are three players that I think can be legitimate scorers at the next level. And they are older players, don't necessarily have this elite athleticism, but I think they have all the offensive fundamentals necessary to be able to play in the NBA. And I think I would be very interested if I am, a semi-contending team that wants to get a player that could actually fit in a rotation and, again, provide shooting, which is what the NBA is all about nowadays. Any of those options would be very interesting to me. But let me know in the comment section. There are still a number of other guys that I haven't even gotten to yet. We're just sort of running out of time here. But Bobby Klintman, prospect out of Sweden, has a lot of scouts excited. Adam Bona, Tyler Smith. Smith was a G League Ignite player. Again, a number of still notable guys out there, which is why I don't think that Bronny James is going to, be selected early on in this second round just for the sake of what asset he could be, because there are some players that can legitimately impact games possibly. So let me know who you are highest on out of the remaining prospects. But we are now going to be diving into the New York Knicks, who just yesterday signed OG Anunoby to a new contract, and talk about the overall situation with New York moving forward here, as they seem to be pushing their chips in on competing this upcoming season. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we sort of move on the conversation here to the New York Knicks, who went out and re-signed forward OG Anunoby to a brand new contract extension, 5 years, $212.5 million. That will be an average annual value of $43.5 million. And there were definitely questions as to whether or not the Knicks would be able to bring, or not that they financially would be able to bring back Anunoby, but whether or not they would be willing to bring him back at a high price, considering the fact that they just traded for Mikal Bridges, who has a very similar skill set, I would say, being a forward who can have the ball in his hands, but really thrives off of being a supplementary scorer and can be an elite defender. And it definitely makes this Knicks lineup scary, especially if they are able to retain Isaiah Hartenstein. Outside of Jalen Brunson, you're talking about, probably your top 5-6 players outside of Brunson who are really good defenders, probably roll out there with a lineup of Brunson and then either Hart or DiVincenzo, and then have Anunoby, Bridges, and Hartenstein. I mean, that is a very talented group, especially considering the fact that Hartenstein, too, it's not like he's a shooter necessarily, that the Knicks are going to be able to entirely space out other teams, but Hartenstein is somebody who is a pretty good passer for a big, and obviously all of the work that he does on the offensive glass can be a difficult situation for other teams. So I love the idea, at least the concept, of what this roster is shaping out to be for next season. Now, it's going to be a very expensive group, and that's why when Knicks fans were disappointed by how the draft played out last night, where they go out and they get Dottier, who may not even play in America this upcoming season, could be a Euro stash so that he doesn't count against the salary cap. I don't really know what else they were expecting. Now, obviously, it's always fun to speculate about what a draft prospect could be, and we pay so much attention when the majority of guys don't pan out, especially when you get outside of the top 20 of the draft or so. But I still think that, the reality is nobody was going to really heavily be a part of what the Knicks are trying to be moving forward. And sure, I mean, there are a number of players that I think could slide in there. Kyle Filipowski could have gotten backup big minutes, been a little bit of insurance in case Hartenstein does walk in free agency, or going out and getting a Baylor Shireman who, defense is that what would have held him back from being a Thibodeau player? It's very possible, but has the spacing that I think the Knicks could definitely improve on. So for the Knicks here, I just don't think that there was a scenario where they were really going to stick and use both of those picks again, especially when you are sitting around watching the draft for a couple hours and you have multiple opportunities to get an impact guy, and you end up just trading for future assets. I think they ended up getting 5 second-round picks or so, including some in today's second round. But all in all, I thought that they played the draft right. It is what it is. It's a little bit less exciting than you would maybe want, but at the same time, the Knicks are going to be a good team regardless next year, regardless of picking somebody late in the first round. And, it does add to the question of they're going to be really good, but is this the version we are going to see? They can pay Hartenstein a contract. I think he's going to be able to get more in free agency, so we could very likely see one of these other teams. Again, I keep talking about the Western Conference, but I look at the Thunder, the Grizzlies, and the Pelicans all as teams that could definitely benefit from having another center option. Now, a couple of those teams have some young center options that I'm sure they would like to build around, but also expectations in terms of all of those teams are trying to throw their name into the ring of contenders. And as much as I like the upside of an Yves Missi for the Pelicans, or Zach Edey might actually be a solid player for the Grizzlies, all of them could use some more impactful day one guys, and Hartenstein for a contract that they end up throwing at him is probably going to give you that higher level production in the first few seasons of, while they are still developing. And again, I'm not saying it's perfect necessarily putting Edey on a developmental path, but just feel like it couldn't hurt for them to go out and get a very talented center as well. So all of that to be said, Hartenstein is a little bit of an unknown. There is some speculation as to what is the future of Julius Randle with this Knicks team. I think they're going to stick with him and just try and run it forward with this season. Julius Randle, I'll have to double check here, but I think he has one season left on his contract, and I could very easily just see them playing it out with him. I know he's not everybody's favorite player, but yeah, so he has this final year guaranteed, and then a player option in 2025-26, which will be $31 million. So I would probably expect him to decline that and try and get something more long-term for himself. But I think the Knicks probably just stick it out with Randle this year, at least through the first half of the season. I am of the belief that the Knicks were not better just minus Julius Randle. Now, if they were to go out and use him to make some other type of a move, then I could say that there might be players that fit what the Knicks are trying to do better than Julius Randle. But it's interesting in terms of, he's somebody who can go get you a bucket. And Jalen Brunson was just backed into a corner of needing to create just about every single possession for the Knicks during their postseason run when they saw all of these injuries start to pile up for them. So I think that they stick it out with Randle and try and compete in the East. Now, I am not ready to put them above the Boston Celtics based off of this Bridges move, and I think that they have a team that is very well constructed to guard the wings of Boston, where Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, I think that a very big part of their postseason success this year was the fact that Jason Tatum attracted so much attention himself, the best defender on the other team, plus a lot of the time, especially when it came to the finals, he was driving almost 20 times per game, so he was getting other defenders to crash, and it was opening up other opportunities for Jaylen Brown, who the majority of the time faced the second best defender. But that's not necessarily going to be something that's quite as exposable as when you play the Indiana Pacers, and I don't even know who your second defensive stopper would be that was, covering Jaylen Brown off the top of my head. But the Knicks are going to be able to put OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges on the two J's, try and put them in jail one-on-one, and I think that series would be a dogfight. Now, Kristaps Porzingis, he's going to be out for the first 6 to 10 weeks of the season. At the end of the day, I'm still taking the Celtics over the Knicks, but they definitely closed the gap, and I did like the move for them, at least in the short term. They're going to be, one of the top 3 contenders, I would say, in the Eastern Conference. They probably just passed Milwaukee, in my opinion, if they weren't already there, in terms of the biggest threat to the Celtics in the Eastern Conference. But let me know how you feel about it. We do have a comment. When it comes to international prospects that's available at the guard position, who do you think fits Miami the best? I mean, if you're talking about players that are still remaining in the draft, I think you're probably running low, as we saw the French Revolution essentially take place in the first round. I mean, Tijan Salon probably would have been actually a pretty interesting. I know he projects a little bit more as a forward, but if you look at the high motor on him and the work ethic, I feel like that actually could have been a very interesting fit for Miami, especially if his three-point shot does ever sort of fully pan out. I mean, you look at the prospects that are still available. Again, I mentioned Bobby Klintman. He's a little bit bigger in terms of guards. I can't say I know all too much about Juan Nunez, who is really the only international guard I'm seeing left in the draft class available, at least at the top of the second round. But I don't know. I think that it would have been interesting if they had gotten Salon or something. Topic is somebody, of course, as well, that seemed like almost maybe just the similarities to Goran Dragic in the name was just like something that I had connected. But, overall, I think the Heat are probably in a position where, I don't know if they do kind of need a guard at the same time. I think that Terry Rozier is going to have a bigger role with the Heat. Last year was, of course, dealing with that neck injury throughout the end of the season, and it took him a little bit after the trade deadline to fully acclimate to playing in Miami, but I thought he was getting better as the year went on before the injury struck. So I think that the Heat are going to be in a pretty decent position next year, and they just bring in Bam Adebayo on a new contract extension. You go out, you get Khalil Ware, who can provide some versatility for you at the big man position for them. So I think that they are in a pretty good spot, all things considered. But we are going to be moving on from some NBA talk here and diving into NFL, where, sticking with the idea of Miami, we have the Dolphins, who are in a contract negotiation with quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, and things have not been going all too great for them early on in this negotiation. So we are going to be diving into all of that next, but stick with us. We will be right back after this quick break. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast as we head into our final segment of the day, where it seems like the Dolphins and their quarterback Tua Tagovailoa have not been seeing eye to eye necessarily throughout this contract negotiation process Omar Kelly of the Miami Herald said that the Dolphins are unwilling to pay Tua a, quote, Goff-esque contract rate. Now, Goff just signed a 4-year deal worth $212 million about a month ago. That is good for $53 million per year. Trevor Lawrence also just signed a big contract extension even sooner than that. 5 years, $275 million for $55 million a year. So some massive contracts going off the board there and sort of resetting the quarterback market. It seems like the Dolphins aren't necessarily in a rush to match that, and that they are going to be willing to sort of play this out with Tua. That they are maybe planning on offering, I think the Manny Maradigue of our the Chip Shot Football podcast here mentioned that they are maybe planning on offering one last extension offer before training camp starts, and then after that they're just going to see how the year plays out. And I absolutely love this decision from the Dolphins, because I was worried that they were going to sort of get caught up in the moment, and especially after those Goff and Lawrence deals come off the table, that Tua was going to ask for similar rates, and I just don't think that I'm there yet with him that I would be willing to pay him that type of money. I'm taking Goff and Lawrence over Tua pretty much 10 times out of 10, and not really thinking too much about it. Tua's a good player, and he is very solid. And, you know, we're talking about Jared Goff as well, who I would probably say those same things about. But at least Goff has shown in this past year an ability to win a couple big games. I don't know if that's the case with Tua. And, you know, even with Goff, go back to 2018 when he made the Super Bowl with the Rams. Now, that was obviously more based on the offensive scheme and the coaching of Sean McVay. I think that's also a very similar to Tua in Miami right now with Mike McDaniel and all the weapons that they currently have. I find this to be a very quarterback-friendly offense that the Dolphins play in. It's not just the receivers. You look at the running backs as well, where you have a Devon Achane just sort of pop up out of nowhere. Raheem Mostert was incredible for them this past year, and there's just speed everywhere that, frankly, I just think a lot of quarterbacks could find their way in that system. Now, eventually it's going to continue to get expensive, but I still believe in the coaching of McDaniel that I don't think there's going to be a significant fall off if Tua ends up walking. Now, obviously, they would prefer to keep him in the building considering how familiar they are with him and such, but it's an interesting debate because, again, by no means, I know I sort of came out of the gates here very anti-Tua. Tua was technically in the MVP race last season, and it was in large part because of the fact that there really wasn't a significant frontrunner for the MVP award this year. I actually thought that there was a case for Tyreek Hill until he started bumping into some injuries about halfway through the year, that he could have possibly been the MVP, which I know was always a long shot considering the positional value there, but I think he was at least in the conversation for a while. And I think it's also interesting considering the fact that there is some injury history with Tua. There was a little bit of skepticism as he was coming into the draft in 2020, I believe it was, and the 2022 season he had the concussions. I wouldn't be worried about his health if that's what the debate is coming down to. I think it should plainly be about, is his talent worth the money? Because last year he held up really well for himself, and he understood that he needed to, be better about taking contact and such, and he learned how to fall was the big story of last offseason, where I think he was doing jiu-jitsu or something that was going to help him sort of avoid injuries and such, and he played healthy. So, it's fair to have some concerns, but I would not be entirely focused on the injury aspect of Tua if that's what you are sort of coming back to in these debates. Is he good enough to make $50 million and lead you to a Super Bowl while taking up that much of the salary cap? I don't really think so with Tua. And, I don't want to be negative on him or anything, because I do think that he is a starting caliber quarterback that, there are a number of teams that if he were to end up walking in free agency a number of months from now, that there could be a lot of suitors. I look at some teams that could have quarterback openings next year. The Jets, depending on what happens with Aaron Rodgers this year. The Steelers have 2 quarterbacks on 1-year deals. The Raiders are currently in a little bit of a limbo here in terms of where they're at. Titans and Saints as well. There's a lot of unknowns, and you can even go a little bit deeper of if Dak walks in free agency, maybe they try and go for Tua at a little bit of a cheaper rate. The Panthers, if Bryce Young, flames out again, hopefully not, because I really am rooting for him to be able to turn around his career trajectory. But, I think that for Tua, it's just you're asking a lot to be paying him that type of money and to take away from the rest of the roster. Now, if you're Tua in this situation, I also think that he should stick to his guns. This was a discussion we had in a production meeting here at the GSMC Sports Network in terms of should he just take the money that's on the table. And I absolutely understand the case as to why he maybe should. Given all the things that I just said, that I'm not really a believer in him, that there is, some concern of what if he has a bad year. But I think he will probably end up just having a fine year. He's either going to get paid from the Dolphins at a year later where the quarterback market will be that much higher, or again, those number of teams that I just listed, somebody would probably give out a contract to him. So it's this weird middle ground where I think it's probably just best for both parties to see how this season plays out and play it out from there. But if either party were to be the one that I think should budge, it would probably be Tua, because I don't think the Dolphins are going to be significantly hurt by getting another year's worth of experience out of Tua and figuring out what happens from there. They could maybe even franchise tag him if they're not totally sold even after that. But I think that, there's a lot of things to consider in this argument. And again, it's just, do you see Tua as being a top 10 quarterback in the league? And there may be some people out there who currently feel that about him. I'm just not with you there. And just got to see it happen in some bigger moments, because when I see Will Levis sort of outperform you in a primetime game like that, when the game is on the line, and you look at the differences in offenses, and I know that Tyreek Hill was hurt in that game as well, but I just had no faith in them then. I had no faith in him playing that Chiefs defense in the playoffs. It's interesting when you're talking about a $50 million contract. But before we wrap up the show, we do have another comment from Doughboy saying the Minnesota Timberwolves were the biggest winners from last night's draft. I absolutely agree there. I think that it is the fan base that can definitely be the most excited about how this panned out for them. Again, I think that even just aesthetically speaking, between Anthony Edwards, Rob Dillingham, and Terrence Shannon Jr., finally, because the Timberwolves, again, I've been saying this for a lot of the offseason, they're an older team than people actually realize. So going in to grab another couple young players sort of more similar to Anthony Edwards' timeline was a very smart move in my idea, in my head. And I also think that Dillingham can provide a legitimate role for the Timberwolves next year in terms of they were going to need a Mike Conley replacement eventually. They needed a backup for him in the immediate as well. And they're still going to be, bumps in the road probably for Dillingham in terms of his shot selection and adjusting a little bit more to a team style game where he's not the most talented player on the court, because he was coming off the bench for Kentucky. It was him and Reed Shepherd, sort of running that bench unit, and they were allowed to play their game a little bit more. Now, that's still going to be some of the case, and I think that Dillingham is going to have the green light in terms of some of those irrational confidence shot takes where the Timberwolves are going to be more than okay with him letting it rip because they need somebody else outside of Anthony Edwards that is going to create a shot. And Karl Anthony Towns, he's a good, talented player, we all know, but I don't know if it's necessarily easy for him to get into his action. And I think that there's a chance it could be for Rob Dillingham. Doughboy also comments, PJ Hall from Clemson will be a good fit because he is versatile. I just talked about the second round. PJ Hall sort of slipped my mind, but I do like the idea of him at the next level. Played a little bit bigger in college, is probably going to be more of a 4 when he reaches the NBA, but a real three-point shot there from the perimeter. I could definitely see it with, I'm assuming you're talking about the Timberwolves as a fit, and I could definitely see that as well, almost if you want to look a little bit long-term here as well. I just believe that Naz Reid is eventually going to take over the Karl Anthony Towns spot. Now, I know that might be a little bit of a hot take for Cat. I think he's very expensive, and he's probably a little bit more expendable now that Naz Reid has shown what he can provide. Of course, the former 6 Man of the Year winner. I've been saying I think he can be a starting player in the NBA. Now, he's not quite the same level of offensive production as Cat is, but I could see, Reid taking over for Cat, and PJ Hall could maybe sneakily be a little bit of a Naz Reid if the Timberwolves were to take him and have him come off the bench. I don't know. That's a big ask out of PJ Hall, so I wouldn't necessarily throw those expectations on him immediately, but I think he could provide a lot of what Naz Reid has over the past couple years of his developmental track. So just something interesting there. Doughboy says Cat is declining. It's tough. I don't think it's that he's declining. I think it's just that this is who he is, and we've sort of seen, and I don't like putting caps on people. Cat at this point is 28 years old, but I don't know how much better we are going to see Cat get over the coming years. And yeah, he can shoot. He doesn't have this elite post game. To be fair, in 2024, it's not like having an elite post game is the, number one weapon for an NBA player. But it is just interesting. He feels very limited. And again, you talk about in a vacuum, who can create a look? I don't think Cat really can like that. And again, you're asking this out of a big man. There are very few big men that I feel extremely comfortable with, 5 seconds left on the clock, being able to get himself a great look. But when you're paying Cat all that money and you already have your center in Rudy Gobert, who I know that this was just a very tough exit from Gobert out of the playoffs, but I do still think that he can provide something, an elite level of defense that I don't necessarily see from Cat. And Cat's just this little bit of a tweener to me in terms of being a star and being just a really good player. And I don't know. It's interesting to sort of balance out that whole conversation. There are teams in the NBA that can absolutely benefit from having Karl Anthony Towns on their roster. I just do wonder with the Timberwolves, who are so expensive, if the future is sticking with Cat, knowing that they have 3 big contracts right now for 3 bigs. I don't know how much longer that's going to be sustainable, but I guess we'll just have to see. But Timberwolves definitely ultimately came out as a winner in this draft. We have another comment asking, what do you think about the Chicago Bulls? Did they win or lose? So it's interesting. Modest Buzelis is, first off, I mean, you just want to talk about sort of the underlying. It was an awesome moment to see Chicago kid drafted by Chicago. That was probably the most emotional selection. So I thought that that was really cool. Buzelis, I don't know necessarily about the fit with the Bulls. Now, the Bulls, I don't know if I can consider them a winner or a loser until we know what definitive direction they're going in. Now, they just made the trade, Alex Caruso for Josh Giddey, who I actually defended the Bulls thinking that they have, if they're going to press this rebuild button, Giddey as a primary ball handler is obviously a much more impactful player than as a third option like he was on the Thunder. And, it's a start, at least for a rebuild. Who knows whether or not they're going to commit to the rebuild. It sounds like DeMar DeRozan might be headed out, where it initially sounded like the Bulls were going to sign him and they were going to continue to play this game of just sort of hovering around the play-in tournament. But, if they are going into a rebuild here, Buzelis, if he can shoot in the league, I do think that he can become a really impactful NBA player. It's solid value for him. I believe they took him number 11. So it was around number 11. I can double check that as we speak here. But I think that it's overall a pretty good draft pick. Again, the fit is a little bit of a question, so I don't know if I would consider them a winner or a loser. Buzelis very easily could have been the number 1 pick in this draft. He was being thought of that headed into this past season, but he ended up, having a weird year with the G League Ignite, where I'm so happy we're finally done with that program, because I think it did zero favors for the development of a lot of these young talents. And I'm higher on the upside of Buzelis than most. So overall, I do like the pick for Chicago, but I don't love it. Doughboy says, Lakers got a good player from Tennessee, but Jeannie Buss needs to let JJ Redick run the Lakers because she doesn't know how to build a championship team. I would definitely agree with that. I actually do think, and I'm not sure, how you took this pick, I think that Dalton Connect is kind of a perfect, first rookie for JJ Redick to have as a young up-and-coming player, that he's somebody that I think can fit into the scheme of what JJ Redick is going to want to draw up. Obviously, as a former role player, great shooter, I think he's going to be able to manufacture good looks for Connect. Connect is already 23 years old, so he's not going to be seen as this young up-and-coming guy that the veterans aren't necessarily going to accept. I really like that pick for the Lakers. It was clear Connect was a little bit disappointed that he slid as far as he did, and you could see he was struggling with a little bit, I thought, on the broadcast. But, ultimately, I think he's going to be a hooper for them, and I thought they made out great. I would have preferred to see him go somewhere else personally as a Celtics fan, but I'm still going to be rooting for him because I think that he is a top talent in this class, and I love the development that he showed. What do you think about Bronny James being drafted maybe by the Lakers? I have a very hard time imagining Bronny goes undrafted here. Just off of his name, it is what it is. Whether it's the Lakers just trying to make sure they, lock him up. He's interested in the Suns as well, who just acquired a couple extra second-round picks from, at least one second-round pick, I think, from the Nuggets in that trade down that they did during the first round. They got pick number 50. I don't know. I'm doing this off the fly here, but they got another second-round pick. It was 56 in this draft as well. So the Suns could potentially take him. Ultimately, I think that with Bronny, even if it is being held hostage a little bit as a trade asset, I don't know. I wouldn't take him early in the second round because I do think that there are a number of really talented players still available that I would prefer to actually have a shot of getting a good player as opposed to just sort of a chess piece in terms of playing the LeBron game. But, ultimately he's going to be drafted, and we'll see with them. It is what it is. It'll be a cool story. I'll leave it at that, because I don't want to bury him, but I don't believe in him. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Thank you to the viewers for helping to contribute to the conversation. Always love interacting with the fans of the show, but that is all we have for today. Be sure to check us out on social media for more exclusive short content as well. Like, follow, subscribe, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We'll see where Bronny James is by then. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.